Hello, welcome to Living Science. Dr. Kanuri Rao, Head of Immunology Group at the International Center for Genetic Engineering and Biotechnology in New Delhi, is here with us today. Dr. Rao, by training, is a chemist, now a renowned name in the field of immunology, not only in India but internationally too. So today we will be in conversation with Dr. Rao, try to find out his journey in life in science. Dr. Rao, very welcome.
Thank you.
Dr. Rao, all the students present here and elsewhere want to know, are you genetically intelligent or you somehow plan your experiments judiciously and your projects accordingly?
Certainly not particularly intelligent. Maybe, I think, pig-headed, I guess. I think the capacity to get excited by an idea and then get obsessed by it and not give up till you've found at least some level of answer you're looking for. I think that's, at least to me, the driving force. And I know many, people who are far more intelligent than me and so on. But I think this pig-headedness and perseverance till you get to at least part of where you want to go, perhaps that's one of the driving forces that, So.
That's a very humble answer from a person of your stature. So we want, after if you look at your research, you have done a lot of very interesting work and you've answered a lot of basic questions in immunology and also in host pathogen interactions. So one would wonder, since you have a lot of chemistry background, you came as a chemist, did it somehow help you think differently than conventionally?
Yes, I think at least around the time when I moved into biology, chemistry was a big help. Because in chemistry you look at structures from three-dimensional principles. You have things like stereochemistry, conformation. So understanding how proteins interact with other components like other proteins becomes relatively easier. I mean, you can conceptualize it in your mind. You can intuitively get a sense of the stereochemical interactions. So in that sense, yes, it certainly helped understand biological interactions better. And
so how did it pave your entry into understanding B-cell biology?
So my first postdoc actually was after my PhD, which was in organic chemistry, was also in synthetic chemistry. And there was a lab which also, in our lab there was also some biology going on. So I got interested more in biology. Particularly there was a lot of, biology was more of a conceptual area. Chemistry, at least at that time, there wasn't any great new concepts evolving and so on. So that's how I moved to biology and moved to UCLA. And there we started looking at growth factor receptors, and it was a completely new experience for me. So it was a learning curve in terms of understanding cells, knowing how to culture cells. All of these were completely new. But on the side, because as a chemist, I also started peptide synthesis in that lab. In those days, solid phase synthesis of peptides was quite popular and seemingly had a lot of applications. So that's something I started in my lab there, and so grew as a peptide chemist for some time. And at that time when ICGB started and I had the opportunity to come back to ICGB, the interface I had, because it is a biotechnology organization and I had no background. So the interface was, because one of the big areas at that time was peptide based vaccines for infectious diseases. So I had, I proposed that we could work on peptide based vaccines for hepatitis B. And the idea at that time was you can generate three-dimensional configurations of peptides which can mimic epitopes of the antigens of hepatitis B. So I came back and we started synthesizing peptides and looking at peptides with defined structures and so on. Of course, on the side I had to learn immunology, so I had a lot of friends around who taught me immunology and actually what a B cell was, what an antibody was, because even those were new concepts at that time for me. And so what happened is we actually somehow got lucky. We were able to generate a peptide that spontaneously kind of folded to generate the shape of the epitope of an antigen in hepatitis B. And interestingly, and at this time we were collaborating with Dr. Subrat Panda at the All India Institute of Medical Science and Pathology. And he was a clinical person looking at hepatitis. And he was a wonderful collaborator and he taught me all the clinical sides of hepatitis B. And interestingly, we found that actually this peptide not only reconstitutes the shape of the epitope, but actually assembles into virus-like particles. A completely new concept at that time, and we didn't design, we just stumbled into it. And so when we were developing this, people at CDC in Atlanta saw our papers and they got excited. And the only animal model available at that time was chimpanzee, and obviously no chimpanzees in India. So there's a guy there called Howard Fields. He wrote and said, "Look, we want to test it in chimpanzees," and we actually went there and tested it. And again, surprisingly, it actually worked. I mean, it prevented the chimpanzees from getting hepatitis B infection. So obviously, we were on to something interesting. Not only scientifically, in the sense you could actually reconstruct virus-like particles with a small peptide, which you could actually do electron microscopy on. And then when we came back in the next step of development, what do you do? And we went to the Director General of ICMR, and none of them had a clue what to do, because in those days we didn't even have regulations for recombinant proteins. So peptides, was a completely, So, but he said, you submit an application, we'll see. And then they lost it, nothing happened after that. So we realized if we pursue this, we are in a dead end. What do you do? How do you make productive use of your time? So that's when we thought, okay, since in this process we learned a little about B cell responses, what antibodies are, let's start using them to study B cell responses. So that's actually how we got into looking at B cell responses, and particularly looking at how shapes define which epitopes become dominant and so on.
So some of your early work have also dealt with finding different conformations in the receptor itself, right? How it fits into, like one receptor can recognize multiple antigens. So can you share that story?
Yeah. So actually looking at the basic, so what happened is we had this one epitope which we reconstructed, and at that time people said if you put a couple more epitopes from another antigen called a large antigen, the immunogenicity and the protective efficacy improves. So we designed a sequence which would have this conformational epitope and two other what you could call linear epitopes. And then Dr. Vijay Kumar in the virology group, he designed the gene for that. He synthesized the gene for that with spaces between epitopes. And he expressed it, and that was becoming an antigen. We started looking at responses. And interestingly, so the idea was, of course, B cells recognize the surface of proteins. So any exposed region of protein was generally thought to be antigenic, and you would actually get antibodies to a given surface. But since we had this defined, we knew exactly the sequence and we could map the epitopes and so on. What we found actually was that as the response develops, the antibody in a mouse model, the antibody response starts getting concentrated on specific regions. So certain epitopes become more dominant than others. So that got us actually into more basic mechanisms. Why does that happen? And it turns out in literature many people had noticed this. And one of the complications in designing such vaccines. So then we started collaborating with Dr. G.C. Mishra, who was at IMTech at that time and subsequently moved as director of NCCS. And he's the one who I learned a lot of immunology from. And a lot of it was actually sitting in Kapil's bar in Chandigarh. And it was a fabulous exercise. So we used to sit and design crazy experiments. How do you address this problem? And the solution came out to be very fascinating. So when you have an antigen and you immunize, so the B cell receptor recognizes the antigen, and some of those B cells start producing antibodies. So you have a situation where you have antibodies against an epitope and a B cells that have to also bind the epitope, pick it up, and get T cell help to proliferate. So you actually have a competition, and if the antibody wins, the B cells die out and the epitope becomes subdominant. But if the B cells win, then you get a further amplification and selection, and it's a very fascinating mechanism that came out. So that's when we actually got more interested in the fundamentals of B cells. And at that time, since we were chemists, we also had a lot of interest in biophysics and so on. And Dr. Manivel was one of my earliest collaborators. We have worked together for the last 25 years. And he was also a bioorganic. He was also a chemist who came into bioorganic chemistries. So we could speak the same language. We always used to wonder, because textbooks tell you that B cells recognize, have the ability to recognize any epitope or any antigenic sequence, that their recognition capacity is infinite. Yeah? And we know that you can take any mouse, immunize with any sequence, you create a completely new sequence, you can in principle get antibodies to that. And we used to always wonder, because so the number of B cells in the body are always restricted, right? You have a fixed number of B cells. A small fraction of those are the naive B cells, which are the ones that will recognize the antigen. So the question is, how does a small population of naive B cells have this capacity to recognize an infinite repertoire of antigens? How does that happen? And while we were discussing, another interesting question came up. There is actually a theoretical paper from somebody at Scripps Institute. So the dogma again was that when an antigen goes into the body, the B cell scan, it scans all the different receptors, and once the right fit is found, that B cell gets activated. And they had done calculations and they found that the scanning process actually will take a minimum of 5 weeks or so, if it has to scan 100 million or a trillion B cells. But we know the response can happen in 24 hours. So how does this process happen? And related to that, another question is that, look at it this way. We say that there is a clonal distribution of receptors to maximize recognition. But if I have, let's say, a bacterial infection, what has to happen? The B cell that can recognize it recognizes, it has to get activated and proliferate, make more B cells and make more antibodies. But by the time one B cell divides into two, which may take about 15 to 20 hours, the one bacteria has become millions of bacteria, because that replication time is only 20 minutes, right? So there's no way, if you just follow simple elementary textbook logic, that B cells can protect you against an infection. So the only option nature has, the problem is you have to maximize recognition capacity and maximize response efficiency. You can't do both, unfortunately, because to maximize recognition capacity, I have to make sure if I have 100 B cells, each of them has a separate receptor capable of recognizing different epitope. The moment I do that, I only have one copy of receptor per, one B cell per antigen. So by the time that becomes when a long time is taken. If I want to improve response efficiency, the other way I make sure, okay, 10 of the B cells have one particular type of receptor, so that they recognize the bacteria. So 10 B cells responding, response is cut short. But in that process, I am diminishing my recognition capacity. But obviously, we are alive today, we have survived evolution, and that was like a huge intellectual problem. How does it, the problem of maximizing repertoire at the same time ensuring maximum response efficiency and with a minimal response time. We started thinking about that, and actually then we started exploring that problem, and we generated antibodies from the very early stage of a response, 2 days after an immunization, against different antigens. And so the antibodies that you get in the very early stage are actually surrogate receptors in a sense, because the binding site is the same. There's no mutations and so on. And we took those as surrogates for the B cell receptor to look at now how do they recognize antigen. And then we use a Phage display library. So now you have, that is a 6-mer sequences, so you have 6 raised to 20 different antigenic sequences. So in a sense you're simulating the real life situation. You have a small panel of receptors, let's say, and exposed to a large unlimited panel of antigens. How many do they recognize? And what we found surprisingly was each of them actually doesn't recognize one, but recognize hundreds of those sequences, and they're completely unrelated. There's no chemical homology, no structural homology, and so on. And then we started looking at the mechanism of binding. How do you do that? And the way so how do I understand the binding process, or in a sense the recognition process? And that's when we went back to 8th or 9th standard thermodynamics. Because remember, when you talk about a protein binding to something, it involves charge and shape complementarity. So how do these two parameters fit in a binding reaction? Now, so how do I study these two without going to crystal structure and so on? So we use this Gibbs free energy equation, free energy delta H minus T delta S, where the S is the entropy component, so degree of disorder. H is the enthalpy. So in a sense, enthalpy represents the strength of the interactions between these two surfaces, and entropy represents any readjustments that happen, change in order of the structure. And we found that in one of these, any of the antibodies can recognize 100 sequences, all with the same affinity. and the affinity of micromolar, which is the affinity of an early immune response. And they do that because everything involved an entropic penalty. So, suggesting that the antibody is actually plastic and can adapt to bind different shapes of different surfaces of antigens. And of course, nowadays when I say plastic, it means flexibility of the CDR loops. So, and in one shot that solved the entire puzzle, because I now have flexible shapes, so that any given antibody, so if I have 100 molecules of that particular, so let us say B cell has 100,000 receptors, copies of that particular receptor, each of them exists in different flexible conformations. It's like like a rubber band, if you stretch it and tap it, it exists in multiple conformations, so that when a particular antigen comes, you can trap it in any one conformation. And since there is no energy involved, there is no energetic penalty to that binding. And because of that flexibility, any one of these early antibodies can bind hundreds of antigens. Conversely, hundreds of antibodies can bind any one antigen. So, and that one simple solution solved the whole puzzle, because now each B cell can bind many different antigens and get activated. Conversely, many different B cells can bind the same antigen. So, that is how, and because many B cells can bind the same antigen, the recognition time business problem goes. And because of the diverse repertoire, the amplified recognition capacity puzzle is solved, and because multiple B cells recognize, you get a very rapid response and large numbers of B cells are activated. So, which is why your early IgM response is very high, and it at least serves to dampen an infection. So, one simple solution to this complex, almost impossible problem, and nature has done it so beautifully. I mean, that was really wonderful to see, to get the solution. You see the beauty of something like this, a simple but elegant mechanism. It's really a wonderful, you understand how elegantly evolution has worked to design these systems. So that was really a first into this recognition problem and how these issues are sorted out. Yeah. So again, a lot of our interest has been how biological systems make decisions, and in many senses, that's the abiding interest even today, although dimensions and the ways we approach it has changed. So what happens? Okay, so to start with, I get a large number of B cells activated in a response, making lots of different antibodies. They're all low affinity, micromolar, so they control the infection. What we know is that from that, a small pool of them gets selected, go into these structures called germinal centers and go through mutational improvements, and within 2 to 3 weeks you start seeing very high affinity antibodies, right? So the question we asked is, how does that happen? So first I had a postdoc who looked at what is the criteria for this selection. When I get these, let's say 1000 B cells activated, only 2 or 3 of them will be selected for maturation. They become the memory pool also. And what she discovered or found was, they are selected on the basis of affinity. I am just using affinity for want of better at this point. So that out of the 1000 B cells, the 2 or 3 of the best affinity are what are selected. So then by then I had another PhD student come, Akansha, and she was a wonderful, I mean now currently she is a faculty at IISER Pune, but she was also as argumentative as I was, and we used to sit in the corridor with coffee and argue for us, and it was an exhilarating experience. Because we used to puzzle over how will the selection take place, how does the system know which B cells need to be selected, and so on. So she designed a system where, and by then we had actually developed a protocol for reconstituting germinal centers in mice. And again, this is all jugaad and tukka and all kinds of things. I don't know how else to say it, because we have never done those things before. So you can irradiate mice with the follicular dendritic cell there, and you can reconstitute the antibody you want, the immune complex you want, and the B cells you want, and see exactly what selection events happen. And she also developed a system where you can purify these IgD positive cells. These are the early B cells which have IgD receptor, and you can activate them with different affinity and see what the outcome is. So you can transfer it back into a mouse and see now does it become a memory cell or not. And then once that was done, she developed a shorter system by looking at cell markers. So we knew that if you only activate a calcium response, you get a cell that is decided just to make primary antibodies and die out. That's what happens to 998 or 1000 B cells that are activated. But if you activate the calcium plus a cyclic AMP response, you actually get cells that are decided to become memory B cells. Now the question, how does this happen? And when she was studying this, she discovered, because normally the IgD receptors are transmembrane receptors and they only activate the calcium response and not the cyclic AMP response. But what she discovered was there was another subset of IgD receptors which are GPI anchored. So they are not transmembrane, but they are sticking to the surface through a lipid anchor. And those are the guys which activate the cyclic AMP response. But that still didn't solve the problem of how. So the thing is, if an antigen binds to these receptors and only triggers calcium, the B cell has decided to make antibodies and die out. If it binds in such a way that activates both, then it becomes a memory B cell and matures and becomes a memory B cell. But just identifying these two receptors didn't really help us in any way. But when she quantified how many of these receptors have, she found that the transmembrane, the conventional receptors, almost 97 to 98% of these IgD receptors, and the ones in the GPI anchor are very small, only about 2 to 3%. And the moment we got those numbers, we knew we had cracked the problem, because both of these receptors have to be triggered. So now, let's say I have this B cell as IgD receptors, and a low affinity antigen binds. When it binds, since it's low affinity, only some partial some of the receptors are occupied by antigen. And since the transmembrane dominant, majority of them are the transmembrane receptors. So you only get one pathway activated. When I have a high affinity, I'm saturating the receptor, so both subsets get occupied and both paths are triggered, and that's for the decision making. And that's another beautiful principle in terms of evolution of these systems, because it works only when you have the 97.3% distribution. If you had a 50-50, it won't work. It cannot select affinity. If you have even a 90-10, it can still select affinity, but the threshold will be lower. So 97 gives you exquisite sensitivity to look at only the highest affinity, which will saturate within short time frames, and only those get selected. And that was another beautiful insight into the elegance, and that's how intelligent decision making. In fact, that's how we concluded our paper, saying that you get an insight into intelligent decision making, how intelligence comes in, because it's very critical. If all the 1000 B cells were to go for maturation, the system would collapse and you would die. You have to select the best so that you can quickly optimize it in 1 or 2 rounds of mutation and give good. So that's very critical to our survival. And this selection, this distribution of 2 isoforms of the same receptor in unequal form allows that degree of intelligence. And so that was another beautiful insight into something very simple but very elegant.
So Dr. Rao, you're answering some very delicate and very interesting, intricate questions. So how did you went about wondering how the transcription regulated in post-stimulating molecules? Because some of your work also can touch on that.
Yeah. So actually, when you work in immunology, even particularly lymphocytes, one of the things that strikes you is that the same cells respond in so many different ways depending on how the receptor is triggered, right? Depending on, let's say, the way receptor is triggered, the cell can proliferate or differentiate or energize, die, and so on. So, so it's actually a challenging question: is how do different decisions emanate from the same receptor? So it becomes like so you start thinking of it in terms of communication, because what the receptors are doing is communicating information about the antigen to the nucleus, so that the nucleus can then drive an appropriate response through a gene expression program. So at that time we started looking at receptor mediated signaling, and the other end was how are those signals then transferred to drive a gene expression program. So we had, at that time there were 4 students in the lab, 2 were looking at the signaling, 2 were looking at transcription, and the idea was somewhere the twain will meet. So in terms of the signaling, one of the questions is, okay, how does the communication process change depending on the nature of antigen? What happens, what are the changes in signals as a function of the difference in nature of antigen. So at that time, then we had a student was working, Dinesh. So he was actually looking at particularly the receptor proximal signal, and he made a very interesting discovery is that well, okay, maybe I'll just